یخا باریشا اردو خدا نخواستہ اگر اگو قضیہ پیش آمد اگو کار شد ابو طالب مینجمنٹ اور والنٹیئرز کیسا ذمہ داری ازورا نمی کنی لہذا ہر کسی کا اولادائے دا اجماعی اولادائے دا پیش کمیشن دانا اور ذمہ داری اولاد ازور دبلے اسخوز ور محمد و آل بیت محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم. یک صلوات جو بھی مصروف سلام شہداء رہتا ہے جو بھی مصروف سلام شہداء رہتا ہے وہ رہتا نہیں پرنا صدا رہتا ہے گو رہتا نہیں پرنا صدا رہتا ہے شمر کہتا تھا یہی ماں ہے علی اکبر کی شمر کہتا علی اکبر کی جس کا ایک ہاتھ کلیجے پہ دھرا رہتا ہے جو بھی مصروف سلام شہداء رہتا ہے یہ شرمندگی پانی کے نہ پہنچانے کی ہے یہ شرمندگی پانی کے نہ پہنچانے کی نیزے پہ بھی سر عباس جھکا رہتا ہے جو بھی مصروف سلام شہداء رہتا ہے شام ہوتی ہے تو اونٹوں سے اترتے ہیں حرم شام ہوتی ہے تو اونٹوں سے اترتے پر سرے شاہ تو نیزے پہ چڑھا رہتا ہے جو بھی مصروف سلام شہداء رہتا ہے رو کے یہ ہند کی بیٹی نے سکینہ سے کہا رو کے یہ ہند کی بیٹی نے سکینہ سے کہا سر تیرا کس لیے ہر وقت کھلا رہتا ہے جو بھی مصروف سلام شہداء رہتا ہے وہ لگی کہنے یتیموں کی نشانی ہے یہی وہ لگی کہنے یتیموں کی نشانی ہے یہی کرتا بے وارثی بچوں کا پٹھا رہتا ہے جو بھی مصروف سلام شہداء رہتا ہے تحفے کعبہ کا تجھے شوق ہے मुस्तरिब दिल सिफते क़िबला नुमा रहता है, जो भी मसरूफ़ सलामे शोहदा रहता है, गो रहता नहीं पर नाम सदा रहता है। पर मोहम्मद वाले मैं दावत देता हूँ जनाब डॉक्टर शबीर किरमानी साहब को कि वो मिंबर पर तशरीफ लाएँ और मजलिस का आगाज़ करें। पर मोहम्मद वाले
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters, Islam and Imam here in Melbourne or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Assalamu alaikum jameen wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The question, why are we here? Dr. Michael H. Hart, in his book 100, The Most Influential People in History, he came forward and he listed out the most influential people that came in human civilization, in his opinion, based on his study of humans and the civilizations. And in this, he listed out people from 100 to 99 to 98, all the way down to the number 1. At that point in time, I want to share with you his research as an astrophysicist and a historian of the conclusion he came to. And he listed out 5 people as the top most influential amongst the 100 that he listed. And I am telling you the order of the 5 in reverse order, for counting down from 5 to 1. So the 5th most influential person, in his opinion, in the history of human beings, of Insan, he listed as Confucius. And he said that he was someone who was deeply influential in the world. Number 4 on the list, he listed Buddha as an individual who was extremely influential in the world. Number 3 on the list, he listed in humanity as the most influential person, Jesus Christ, Isa alayhi salam. Number 2 on his list of most influential people who have had the most impact in the history of humanity, he listed Isaac Newton, the physicist and mathematician. And number 1 on his list, he listed as the most influential person in the history of humanity as Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. When asked why did you list Muhammad? Of all the people that you could have listed, you could have put Jesus as number one, you could have put anyone as number one, you could have put a president, a historian, you could have put Buddha or Confucius as number one. Why did you choose Muhammad? He gives an interesting answer. And Dr. Hart says, look, my decision to choose Muhammad as the most influential person in history is maybe surprising to some people. And although, to be fair, he has criticized Rasulullah in certain places, he's not given a blanket statement that he agrees with everything. But let's put that on the side for a second. He said, look, I don't have a choice really in terms of choosing who is the most influential person in the history of humanity because of the following. He said, every other person on this list, whether it is Confucius or Buddha or anyone else or Jesus or Newton, every single one of them either brought one or the other to humanity, but not both. What? They either brought a spiritual system or a secular system, but not both. So he says, if you go down the list, let's go through our list. He says, number 5, Confucius is known for his spiritual contributions to the world. If you go number 4 on the list, you'll find that Buddha is known for his spiritual contributions to the world. If you go to number 3 on the list, Jesus Christ, Hazrat Isa alayhi salam is known as the person who is revered for his spiritual contribution to the world, the religion of Christianity, for example. He says number 2, which is interesting, he says Isaac Newton is known for his secular contribution to the world. That is, the mathematics and the physics. By the way, a side note, Newton was an adamant mawahid. He believed in one God. That is, to the point that at that time, at Cambridge University, where he was a professor, you had to be ordained as a priest, and you had to pledge allegiance, so to speak, to the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And Newton, it's a fallacy that they say most scientists don't believe in God. Most scientists are in taqiyya in reality. And so this idea of Newton, he said, I believe in one God, and Jesus never said that he was God or the Son of God. He said there is only one God, to the point that he got special exemption to be the Lucasian chair of mathematics and physics at Cambridge. But he's known for his secular contributions. Another time I invite you to read the views of Newton on God. It's interesting. Anyways, let's leave that to the side. But number 1 on the list, he said, I don't have a choice. Why? Because Muhammad is the only person on this list of all the people that I read in the history of humanity who brought a complete spiritual system to the world and a complete secular socio-economic system for the world. And no one else did this. That is, the contribution of this individual was so immense that he was someone who brought a religion as well as someone who brought a complete socio-economic system. So this is something that needs to be investigated and looked at in terms of why are we here? Listen to Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. على حب فاطمة الزهراء صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. So the first element of the equation is this individual from a secular perspective. How do you explain to your friends, your family, those people who are your colleagues and your classmates who may not be Muslim, who may not be followers of Ahlul Bayt, who are these personalities and these individuals? First aspect, number 1. Number 2, this same Muhammad who gave the world a spiritual system, a socio-economic system of justice in the world, this same individual comes forward and says to the world, Hussain minni wa ana minan Hussain. That I am from Hussain, Hussain is from me. That means that whatever my stand is Hussein's stand. Whatever my vision is Hussein's vision. Meaning that if you agree with this perspective, that Muhammad had an influence on the world and he was changing the paradigm of the world, and he continues that no other person in a period of 23 years changed humanity like the way Muhammad has. If this same Muhammad is saying one thing, that same Muhammad is also the one who's saying that if you want to see the continuation of my message, you have to look at this grandson of mine, who by the way happens to be my grandson, but it's not because he's my grandson that you follow him. You follow him because God said so, that's it. And it so happened that that is my grandson. Now, this is one aspect of the equation. This is one level. Number two, if you look at some of the greatest writers in history of poets, shu'ara, you will find the list of the world has number one on the list in terms of most selling, most read. You will find the likes of Shakespeare listed on this list. But today, second amongst this list, you will find a name which is not necessarily an English name at all. His name is Rumi, or Jalaluddin Rumi. And the world reads the poetry. And many people translate into English and they try to find out what is Rumi saying, for example. Now whether you agree with him, disagree with them, leave that to the side. But who is one of the people that he was enamored by? That if you want to explain to the world, who are these personalities? Who are Muhammad? Who are Ali? Who are Fatima? Who are Hassan Hussain? Just look at the works. So if you're a renown to the world, if you're moved by Rumi, who was Rumi moved by? And if you go to the Diwan of Rumi himself, he says, as Ali amuz ikhlas amal. Learn from Ali the sincerity of action. Where did he say this? And when did he say this? He said this at that moment where Imam Ali alayhi salam was on top of his opponent who is fighting in the battlefield in the heat of battle. And the world was afraid of this opponent. And Ali was about to finish this opponent and could have at any moment in time. When this same individual spat on the face of Ali. And they asked Ali alayhi salam, they asked Amir al-Mu'mineen, they said, Ali, you were about to finish your opponent, but we were in the distance and we saw that you stepped away from him and then you stepped back. And then you finished him. Why? Why? That when you had the upper hand and you were able to finish him, you didn't, but you stepped away and then you came back. And he said that at that moment when I could have finished him, he spat on my face. And I did not want for one moment that my will and the will of Allah is separated in any way. So to show the world that Amir al-Mu'mineen did this. So that sincerity of action, ikhlas in his amal, was so much so that he was saying it's not about me at all, it's about God Almighty. And he said this is self-control, this is sincerity, this is knowing who you are. This same Ali is the one whose son is Hussain. And that's why it's so important to know that Muhammad's stand is the stand of Hussain. Ali's stand is the stand of Hussain. The poet says, Ruhe azah hai baap, to beta namaz-e-deen. Masjid Ali ki hai to musalla Hussain ka. Masjid Ali ki hai to musalla Hussain ka. Jagir kibriya, hui taqseem is tarha. Kaaba Ali ka arsh mualla Hussain ka. The poet says that when it comes to Hussain and Ali, one is the father, one is the son, but the spirit of the two is the same. And whereas when Allah's estate, in the metaphorical sense, was distributed, the house was the house of the father of Ali because he was born in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the arsh of Allah is known as Arsh Mu'alla, and Karbala, where Hussain is buried, is known as Karbala al-Mu'alla. That is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with respect to these personalities, has ordained for you and I to follow these personalities so we understand who are our representatives to emulate in our lives. Therefore, in this brief discussion and this beginning of this conversation with you and I want to look at a few things so that we can lay a groundwork of the future of our community and where are we going. And why is this so important? So a few things that I want to look at with you tonight are, what is it that Islam encourages us and follows the Ahlul Bayt should focus on, and why are we here? What's the purpose of our gathering here and commemorating the Ahlul Bayt? Number one. Number two, with respect to this, what is the challenge that we are faced with in the modern world, in the modern society? Living in Australia, living in Singapore, living in Korea, living in America, living in London, living in the United Kingdom, living in France, living in wherever you may be, because the world is a global village today. What are some of the challenges and what happens when you don't adapt to the times, and what are some of the consequences that we have already seen and we continue to see? Number three, how can you open your mind, and how can I open our minds to understand what is our vision, to understand what was Sayyid al-Shuhada's vision for what we should be doing and following and emulating and understanding about religion today, and how can we use that to become the best version of ourselves. And another element of this arrival, and tonight of course is a very special night, we'll be commemorating the arrival to Karbala and the departure from Medina towards Karbala, and why that's so important for us to remember, and why it is something that mourning actually makes us revive ourselves and show our living rather than dying. This is what we'll look at tonight, inshallah. Wherever you are, here in Melbourne or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, send a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, the dynamics of the challenges that we're facing are quite clear to you, but I want to summarize some of those things in terms of what has the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt told us in terms of what is our focus and our methodology of how we proceed. Allow me to explain. If you want to understand the whole Quran, and we will be expanding and discussing the Quran extensively, inshallah, in the following nights. But the verse that I recited at the beginning is a verse from Surah Al-Kahf of the Holy Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمْ حَسِبْتَ أَنَّ أَصْحَابَ الْكَهْفِ وَالرَّقِيمِ كَانُوا مِنْ آيَاتِنَا عَجَبًا. Now this is a verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is inviting you and I to reflect from Surah Kahf. And it talks about this idea of Ashab al-Kahf. But there's another significance of this verse, and that is, according to the historians, when it comes to the movement of Karbala and Imam Hussain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not necessitate, He did not require, He did not mandate that Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam shows any mu'jiza or karamat apparently. That is, Imam Hussain could have finished the other army in a moment if he wanted to i'jaz of Imamah, but he didn't. He could have had water if he wanted in a moment, but he didn't. He could have had many things that he wanted, but he didn't. He could have had his companions come in a moment to Tayyal Arz or something, but he didn't. There was this system that Allah has, and He stayed within that system, but there is one moment in particular. There were small karamat, small in my language and your language, the karamat that the Ahlul Bayt showed here and there. But one of the mu'ajizat that was shown according to the ulama, and some of the most strict scholars have written this, and that is that when the Imam, his blessed head was in the bazaar of Kufa, he recited these verses from the spear of Surah Al-Kahf. Why did the Imam recite these verses? What is the lesson for you and I here? What are the stories that are told in Ashab al-Kahf that invite us to think? Why is it that Imam Hussain recited these verses, and what does it have to do with you and I? And how can we learn from it? You know, if you want to understand the whole Quran, the entire Quran is summarized in Surah Fatiha. The opening, 7 verses. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. The whole Quran is there. Now the reality is all of the Quran is an expansion of these verses. It elaborates on it. It fills up further than this. So if the Quran expands, it becomes the Quran over 6,000 verses. If it contracts, it becomes Surah Al-Hamd. But it goes further, as Amir al-Mu'mineen says, that all of the Quran is in Surah Fatiha. And all of Surah Fatiha is in the Bismillah of Surah Fatiha. And all of the Bismillah of Surah Fatiha is in the Ba of the Bismillah of Surah Fatiha. And all of the Ba is in the dot underneath the Ba. وَأَنَا النُّقْتَةُ تَحْتَ الْبَاءِ, and I am that dot which is underneath the Ba. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala At this point in time, what I want you to reflect on, these are when the Imam says something, it's not like you and I saying something. When you and I say something, maybe we may do some exaggeration. The Imam does not exaggerate. The Imam tells things exactly as they are, neither more nor less. And so when the Imam is saying this is something for us to reflect on, that there is this concept that if you want to understand the practicality of the religion, it comes through these personalities. And human nature is such that if you don't take the divine representatives that Allah sent as role models, human beings find their own role models. And whoever those role models will be, they will be less than perfect if they are not given by Allah. So that's why we follow these personalities. Now stay with me. There's a narration that is attributed to the 6th Imam as well as the 8th Imam. A man comes to the Imam. He says, Yabna Rasulullah, can you tell me the major sins? Can you tell me the ma'si al-kabira, gunah al-kabira, the major sins? So now, the people thought perhaps the Imam will list out a huge list of many, many things. And in this riwayah, although there's other riwayat and other narrations that detail other things, but I'm reading this directly from the Risala of Sistani, Hafadhahumullah, where he says, look, the Imam responded, if you want to know the major sins, they're the following. He said, there's 6 of them. Know them. So if you stay away from this, you can stay away from many big sins. You can help yourself. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we say in Surah Fatiha, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Right? The path of those who you have blessed, guide us on that path. And not the path of those who have gone astray. So every time Allah tells us in the Quran or anything, a story, a narration of people good, we are saying, make us like those people. Like Ibrahim, like Ismail, like Rasulullah, like Musa, like these people. They Allah make us like them. Like Khidr, like Luqman. Allow us to be like them. And then when Allah tells us about negative personalities, when Allah tells us about Fir'aun, or Harun, or Qaman, I should say. He's telling us about Fir'aun, Shaddad, Haman, Qarun. He's telling about these personalities. These are negative personalities. Stay away from them. Be like Musa, be like Harun. These are good people. Musa, Moses in the Bible. Aaron is Harun. So he says, look, be like, there's positive personalities and negative personalities. Allah has told me both. Stay away from the negative, go towards the positive. And so this is one element that Allah is reminding you and I of. Now, when this person asked, sometimes he was expecting a very long answer. What are the major sins? What are the ma'asiyat kabira? The Imam said there's 6, note them down. So he was listening. So he said, number 1, shirk, major sin in the court of Allah. To associate anyone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, major sin. Shirk has many forms. And the idea is, there is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, before Islam, the Arabs believed in Allah, yes or no? The Arabs believed in Allah, believe it or not. But they also had 360 other idols that they believed in. Allah comes from the Arabic al-ilah, the deity. Al-ilah contracted became Allah. So they said, Muhammad, we have no problem with believing in Allah. We already believe in Allah. They had a problem with La ilaha. There is no God except Allah. So Allah was the high God that they already believe in. They said, these are just our small gods. First principle in Islam, do not associate anyone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not commit shirk, number 1. He says, number 2, major sin, gunah al-kabira, in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to kill any innocent person. Any innocent human being, you kill them, major sin in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Quran even alludes to, the one who kills an innocent person, it is as if he has killed all of humanity. And the one who saves an innocent person is as if they save all of humanity. So number 2, he says, to kill an innocent person, major sin in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 3, he says, to run away from the battlefield of jihad. To run away from, now jihad is not a term that means holy war. You and I need to know the Quran and we need to know our religion, otherwise other people are going to start telling us our religion on the news channels that you may have around your world. So the word holy war or the phrase holy war is not in the Quran. The word jihad is, which comes from juhad. Juhad means to struggle. Have you heard of a word called mujtahid? The root word of mujtahid is also juhad. To struggle, the one who struggles for knowledge. Where Rasulullah himself says that the major struggle and the minor struggle is on the battlefield. The major struggle is right here. In the soul, in the chest, in the heart, in the nafs. That's the major struggle. So he says, number 3, to run away from the battlefield of jihad. Number 4, to accuse an innocent woman of indecency. Number 5, he says, to disrespect one's parents. To do disrespect of your parents is a major sin in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, disrespect can mean many things. But I'll tell you one thing. The standard of Islam is more strict than, or more respectful for parents than the other standards of our society. Someone may say, what does it mean to do good? We'll come to that in a few nights. But the Imam says, to disrespect one's parents is a major sin in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 6, he says to steal the property of an orphan, a yatim, someone who has lost their father, they lost their mother, and there's no one to look after them, and they have property, they have money or something that belongs to them, that is their right, and you steal it, it is a major sin. Remember, Amir al-Mu'mineen in his wasiyah, in his will, he writes a point of emphasis. He mentions a few things, and he says, make sure you never forget them. He says, one of them, he says, is Allah, Allah fil Quran. He says, by Allah, do not neglect the Quran. Allah is a point of emphasis. And then alongside that, he says, Allah fil aitam. By Allah, do not forget the orphans. So if you and I, as followers of Ahlul Bayt, does it mean that ibadah, worship, and commemorating the Ahlul Bayt is simply just namaz, roza, hajj, zakat? Or are there some hukuk Allah and there's some hukuk al-ibad, some rights of the people? And in that you will find, how did Amir al-Mu'mineen, how did Imam Sajjad, how did the Ahlul Bayt spend their days and nights? And you will find that Amir al-Mu'mineen spent his time looking after the orphans. He spent his time looking after the poor of society, looking after the most marginalized members of society. So number 6 is to steal the property of the orphan. Now this man thought that his list was complete. But the Imam said number 7 is ta'arrub ba'd al-hijrah. At this point in time, the man said, ta'arrub ba'd al-hijrah? What is this? He said 2 points. He said, Yabna Rasulillah. First of all, I know that when you say something, you don't make a mistake. He was a Shia, he was a believer. He was someone who had some ma'rif of the Imam. So say something wrong, you don't make a mistake like this. You know, sometimes a teacher, they give a trick question or something to make the student think. So the Imam here says, very good, you picked up on this, you noticed this. I said 6, but there were 7 that I just mentioned. And he says the reality is, ta'arrub ba'd al-hijrah and shirk are one and the same. So now, he's saying the last one and the first one are the same. How? And what is this? And this is what I want to come to in the next level of this conversation. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the next level, ta'arrub ba'd al-hijrah, and this is from the Risala of Sayyid Sistani, Abidullah, I would refer you to your own respective marja. He says that when it comes to this, what is this? Ta'arrub ba'd al-hijrah. And he says it is to leave a place where you are able to practice your religion, to go to a place where you are no longer practicing your religion, in a way that you are no longer staying away from muharramat and you are not adhering to wajibat. Meaning, you go from a place where you are able to practice your namaz, roza, hajj, zakat, all the likes, and you go to a place where you are now no longer able to practice it, and you are neglecting the wajibat, and you are not staying away from muharramat. This migration, this hijrah is one of the major sins that the Imam has outlined. Now, stay with me and do not take a conclusion until we complete this conversation. Otherwise, you'll come out with the wrong understanding. Now, in this same line, there are some exemptions and some exceptions that we need to be aware of, number 1. Number 2, notice that I did not say go from a Muslim country to a non-Muslim country. Because that's not what the riwayah says and the narration says, and that's not what the scholars say. There are many quote-unquote Muslim countries where it's more difficult to be a Muslim than there are some non-Muslim countries where you can be much freer in your practice of Muslims. So this is where we need to be very clear about the dynamics of the equation. I'll give you an example. One day I was flying back from, I was at Dubai airport. And at Dubai airport, I'm standing there at the podium and desk and I put my passport down and the person begins to go through my paperwork. And the person next to me, they come and they put down one passport and another passport. And I noticed that there's only one person there. Why did he put down 2 passports? And at that point in time, I noticed this was a local or someone from that region, and he had not only one passport for himself, but when I looked at his shoulder, he had, mashallah, a bird on his shoulder, a falcon. And mashallah, his falcon also had a passport for himself. Muslim brother, no passport. Falcon, alhamdulillah, gets a passport. So this is our world in 2021, 22, 23. So at that point in time, this is one dynamic of the equation. Now stay with me here. What is an example of an exception to this migration where you're able to migrate? By the way, and you can check this in the Risala of your respective marja, where they say, look, this is an individual decision that every baligh, aqil individual needs to make themselves. What does that mean? Example, if there is a family, let's make it easy. Family, husband, wife, child, girl, daughter, and a son. Let's make it easy. Let's say all of them are over 16 years, 15 years plus 16 years. So it's easy. Everyone's baligh, wajib, aqil. Now, the father says, I feel I can make this migration, this hijrah. Nothing will happen to my iman and my belief system and my practice. I can make it. He can go. The wife says, I believe that I can make this migration. I can make this movement. Nothing will happen to my iman, my aqidah, my practicing of Islam. No problem. The daughter thinks that she will be fine as well. She believes her belief system is good. She can make the migration. She's allowed to make the migration. But the son, in this example, the son says, I don't know. I don't know if my belief system, I don't know if my practicing will be effective. I don't think I can make this migration, so he's supposed to stay back. Individual decision making. It's not that, the family is going. If you're baligh, wajib, aqil, you need to make your own decision in this world. Now stay with me here. Does this necessarily mean a Muslim country or not a Muslim country? Now stay with me. There's a riwayah in terms of this that also explains there is one condition in which one can actually make this migration even if they have a threat and a worry that their iman could be affected. And that is when your life is on the line. If your life is on the line, you can migrate. For example, if you're in Afghanistan or Pakistan or some places, or for example, in parts of Iraq or parts of the Muslim world where Shias are targeted and they're killed, you are allowed to migrate, but only to the extent that your life is saved. Meaning what? It doesn't mean go to the CBD in Melbourne and go downtown, huh? It means you do to that extent that saves your life. Example, one of the best examples of a marja in the 21st century adhering to this principle is Sayyid Khomeini, rahmatullahi alayhi. Where he was exiled from Iran, where did he go? Where did he go first?
France.
Before France. Before that, where's the first place he went to? Turkey. He went to Turkey. When he went to Turkey, they said this person is causing a revolution, the people are coming. He went to a remote town and the people began to be so impacted by his spirituality. They said, sorry, but thanks, but no thanks. The Turkish government said we have to deport him. And then he went where? Where did he give the dars for 13 years? In Najaf. In Najaf, he gave dars, for example. And then eventually he went where? Where you said? France. When he went to France, was he saying, where's the Eiffel Tower? Where's Champs-Élysées? I want to go shopping. I want to go tourist. I want to go see where is everything. But he lived in a little chateau, a little villa that someone had given, and he would come out and he would give a statement to the public under a tree, and he would go out. By the way, Islam is not against travel. But what is the priority? This individual, this scholar, this alim showed us what is the priority. He said, I'm not allowed to live in the country I'm from. I've been exiled here and here and here, and I'm just trying to follow the rules and I'm trying to save my life. I'm not trying to ruffle the feathers, and I'm not trying to become a part of this society because society is whatever it may be. Now, by the way, it does not necessarily mean that you and I need to investigate this more. But if a scholar of that caliber is saying that I need to be cautious, then maybe you and I need to be doubly cautious. Careful, careful. That doesn't mean any conclusion. Don't get a conclusion yet. Next level, riwayah from the 6th Imam. And then you can read this in the Risala as well. Look, a man comes, he says, his name was Hamad. Hamad al-Sindi, companion of the Imam, 6th Imam. He says, Yabna Rasulillah, I'm a businessman, I'm a tajir, I'm a trader, I'm an entrepreneur. I go and do business in Byzantium. in the Roman Empire, where they're not Muslims there. And when I go there and I come back to Medina, the Muslims, they make fun of me, they make jokes. And they say, Hamad, you go so much to those places, one day you're going to die. And if you die there, you will die and you'll be raised amongst those people. So when he said this, he said, Yabna Rasulillah, I want to know from you. They say this to me, and I'm a merchant, I'm a businessman, I'm going there for business, and I'm trading. When I do this, does that mean that what they say is true or not? I want to know from you. So the Imam, look at the wisdom and the hikmah of the Imam. You know, in our world today, straight away someone asks a question, you want an answer right away. And you want an answer that's very quick. The Imam said, hold on a second. Hamad, explain something to me first. He said, before I answer your question, I have a counter question or two for you. He said, yes, Ya Rasulullah, please. This is ilm. You know, the ability to branch knowledge into different dimensions. So he says, when you go to do business in Byzantium, in the Roman Empire, do you tell people about us? Do you tell people about the Quran? Do you tell people about the Ahlul Bayt? Do you tell them about us? He says, Bala ibn Rasulullah. Yes, when I go to Rome, when I go to Byzantium, I tell them about the Quran, I tell them about you, I tell them about everything. He said, very good, okay. He said, how about when you're here in Medina, do you tell people? He said, no, not when I'm in Medina. I don't tell people about Quran and Ahlul Bayt and things like that. Maybe everyone's already Muslim at that point. He didn't feel the need to do so. So then the Imam says, then, very well. Based on this, if you go and do business in that land and you die in that land, Allah will raise you as a nation on your own on Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the Day of Judgment, and there will be nur in front of you. Qawm and Ummah in Allah's definition and your definitions is not the same. Allah raised Ibrahim as a Ummah on his own. Although there were many people who were disbelieving and fighting against Ibrahim, but Allah said Ibrahim himself is a one-man army, is a one-man nation. So he said similarly, the Imam says to him, look, if you die there in that state, then you will die with nur and light in front of you. Prerequisite is what? The principle we learn from this is what? Wherever you are in the world, from Australia to Canada to the United States to Russia to everywhere in between, if you are reminding the people of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt and bringing up the zikr of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, you are doing a good thing and you are on the right path. But if you're not, you need to check yourself. But what's beautiful about this is, in a moment you can change yourself. Now, another third element that I need to discuss is, I'm not saying, and I hope no one gets this, that this means that you pack up your bags and you go somewhere else. For many people, that's not an option, number one. Number two, where are you going to go? Some of the quote-unquote Muslim countries are 10 times worse than the other countries. The world has become global. So the answer, the solution in these 10 nights, I'll tell you right now, is not to pack up and go anywhere. For people like me and many faces I see here, this is home, this is where we've been, this is where we've built up. And believe it or not, and this may shock you, but as much as you and I would like, I see people who are from different backgrounds here, from the Indian subcontinent, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, maybe India, or also Iran. But believe me, at home, the Ahlul Bayt, at least Rasulullah, Imam Ali alayhi salam, believe it or not, they didn't speak Urdu at home. They didn't speak Farsi at home. Although they knew all these languages, by the way, because there are riwayat that people used to come from Sindh and other places, and they would speak to them in their language. But at home, oftentimes they were speaking Arabic, and then later on, there were other dynamics. But predominantly that was the language. So why am I saying this to you? Language has a beautiful elements in it. And one of the things that I want you to consider for a moment is your families, your ancestors, my ancestors, they weren't always in the parts of the world that they are today. But remember, the most valuable thing that you possess in life is not your bank balance, your car, your house, your education. Although those are all important, those are not the most valuable thing. The most valuable thing that you possess is your love of the Ahlul Bayt. And the reason for that is, it is the spring of all the good that you do in your life, or at least it's supposed to be. And what I mean by that is, you and many of your fathers and mothers and ancestors, you may have left loved ones back home, wherever you may have come from, but no matter what, you brought the love of Abu Abdullah in your heart, wherever you went. That's why the riwayah says, إِنَّ لِقَتْلِ الْحُسَيْنِ حَرَارَةً فِي قُلُوبِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That verily, in the remembrance of Hussain, there is a fire that is in the hearts of the believers that never extinguishes. Keep that fire alive. So in the next few nights, our topic is what? Our topic is this: the eternal renaissance of the Hussaini movement, Karbala, and the future of our community in the 21st century. And I will unpack and explain this over the next few nights about what do I mean, and what is it that Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam did in the 61st year of Hijrah, and now it's 1444 Hijrah, and till this day Islam is alive because of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And I'll give proof and evidence from other scholars who are not from our school of thought, and what they said for us to understand this. But why? Why is this so important? I know that you may not be accustomed to this, and this style of maybe Majalis may be new to you, but I want to explain to you what's happened in America and Canada and other parts of the world where we come from, and I want to understand from you also what's your experience. True stories about what happens when we don't know our priorities and what we should be focusing on in our community. True story. I'll give you just two. Number one, this happened not that long ago in North America. Alim is sitting at his office desk in the masjid, in the Imam Bargah, in the Hussainiyah. He gets a knock on the door of the masjid, of the Imam Bargah, the Hussainiyah. He gets up from his desk, goes to the door. He opens the door. He does not see anyone there. It's the middle of the day. He doesn't see anyone. It's in the morning. And he looks around. No one. He looks down. He notices a dead body. Dead body. He's standing there. What on earth is going on? Imagine you see someone there. He gets a call on his phone. He says, Shaykhana, Salamu Alaikum. Wa Alaikum Salam. Did you see the dead body of the deceased? He said, yes, I'm in shock. What's going on here? Can you please explain? He said, yeah, that's my father, my dad. My father, he passed away this morning. I have to go to work. Can you please bury him for me? These are not fairy tales about what's going on. This is the reality of what's gone on and what's going on in our society right now. Number one. Number two, true story again, in North America. Sayyid Shia family. Alim is visiting to recite Majalis. The father passes away, he dies. And the Alim is visiting. And he says that they bring the news. They say, Sayyid, this person has passed away. We need to go to the funeral home. We need to make the arrangements for the burial. We need to make sure that they get the proper arrangements for their ghusl and kafan and dafan. We need to make sure that it's wajibi kifai. We need to make sure. He said, yes, please, let's go. And so they get to the funeral home, and the son is there, who's coming from a Shia Sayyid family, and he says, Salamu Alaikum, wa Alaikum Salam. He said, who are you? I'm the son. He said, your father passed away? He said, yes, condolences. We're very sorry for your loss. He said, I'm here to perform the respective rituals for your father, to pay the respects, to bury him. He said, to bury him? Yes, to give him ghusl, kafan, to put him in the ground, to give him the rights of a Muslim, of a believer. I'm here to do it. Let me know what I can do. I'm at service to you. He says, Sayyid, you don't need to worry about any of this. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. He said, what do you mean? Some other scholar came, he said, no. He said, I already signed the paperwork, documents, everything signed, finished, don't worry. He said, what do you mean? He said, I already signed the papers for my father to be cremated, burned. Don't worry. He says, look, I will pay out of my own pocket. Just please revoke this so that we can bury him properly. You cannot do this. He pleaded with him, he begged him, nothing worked. He said the documents are already signed, the work is done. Khalas. These are happening while you and I are breathing. This is not something that I'm saying 5, 10, 15 years ago. These have already happened 5, 10, 15 years ago. Now I'm not telling you to, for example, neglect what is where you have come from in the cultural dynamics. I'm just inviting you to think about what is the obstacle that we are facing and how can we focus on the future of our community. At the same time, there are other narrations that they say that one element of the equation is shirk is the major sin in Allah's eyes. But there's a second sin, and that is لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله إن الله يغفر الذنوب جميعا. That do not lose hope in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will forgive all those. That is meaning that it is a sin in Islam. It is a sin to lose hope in the mercy of Allah. It's the second sin after shirk. Meaning what? Allah does not want you to lose hope. I'm not telling you this to lose hope. I'm telling you this to understand we have a challenge in front of us, but that challenge is also an opportunity. Remember, how we see things and how the Ahlul Bayt, it's different. How Ibrahim saw a difficulty is actually sometimes and many times an opportunity. You don't see it that way. Any difficulty that comes in your life, Allah is trying to elevate you. Allah in the Quran says, Inna ma'al usri yusra. Verily with hardship comes ease. Not after. Some people say, they're saying after hardship comes ease. No, ma'a means with. With hardship comes ease. And perhaps the best explanation that I've come across about how we see things and how the Ahlul Bayt see things is maybe different. There's a poet, and I'll translate. I will be reciting poetry in the next few nights in honor of the Ahlul Bayt, but I will try wherever possible to translate so no one gets lost according to the fray. And so we see Karbala, we see the difficulties of Imam Hussain, we see the water that was cut off, we see the brutality of what happened. And definitely it was a big challenge. But if you know the Quran, and you know the story of Adam, and he had to deal with his son, Qabil killing Habil. If you know the story of Nuh, that he had to propagate and do tabligh for 950 years. The Quran says, Alf Sinin illa khamsina ama, 1,000 years less 50. Although he lived longer, but the Quran says this was the era of time where he was doing tabligh. You know, you and I, we give up after a day or two. Imagine 950 years doing your job. And then Allah delivered Noah. Or you go further than this and you go to the example of those people who came during the time of Ibrahim. Ibrahim gave every major test to the point that they made a fire and they threw him towards the fire. And Allah says, in the Quran, Ya naru kuni barda wa salamun ala Ibrahim. Oh fire, become cool and easy. By the way, this is Ibrahim's test, not yours and I's. If you and I, if Jibreel comes and says, Ibrahim, do you need my help? You take the help from Jibreel. You don't say this because Ibrahim's at a higher spiritual level. Same, you'll find Rasulullah. The same is true for Imam al-Hussain. Yes, it was difficult what Imam Hussain did. Yes, it was difficult to see the difficulty in the travesty, but he understood. And that's what we say in Ziyarat al-Warisa. As-salamu alayka ya waritha Adam, and all the prophets we go through. Because he stood. The movement of Hussain is not independent. The movement of Hussain is the same movement of Adam, of Nuh, of Ibrahim, of Musa, of Isa, of Rasulullah himself. That's why whenever you see a difficulty, the same way we may have difficulties here, notice that there's an opportunity. And so the poet who says this, he says, I wrote these lines in honor of Imam al-Hussain. And he's not someone who's considered necessarily, he's a poet named Faraz, Ahmad Faraz. He says, हर्फ ताज़ा की तरह किस्से पारी ना कहूँ, कल की तारीख को मैं आज का आईना कहूँ, और इश्क की राह में जो कोह गरा आता है, इश्क की राह में जो कोह गरा आता है, लोग दीवार कहें मैं तो इसे जीना कहूँ. This idea that he's saying that Imam Hussain, you and I think that Imam Hussain was demoralized. No, he saw the travesties. You think that this is a big mountain that is an obstacle in the way. I see this as a ladder case, a staircase to the divine. How you see the challenge is how you will act upon it and how you will move forward. There's much to say. I'll build on it. In the next few nights, we'll be discussing some of the big questions that you have, that I have, about why do I need religion in the 21st century? Is there any benefit or not? Number two, why is Islam the right religion? What is the proof and the evidence of God, or is there any? What is the future of our community in the next 50, 100, 200 years, based on the history of other communities who came here before us. What is it that the Ahlul Bayt ultimately wanted, and what Allah wanted? And how can we learn from that? Does Islam say anything about career development? My job, my business, my life? If Islam is a complete way of life, does it tell me anything like this? What are the different categories of knowledge? And why did Islam emphasize knowledge so much? And finally, the big question that we'll try to answer is, why am I here, and why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create me and you? What is the purpose? And why are we particular here in a place like Australia? Why are we in Canada, United States, for those who are listening, wherever they may be listening? Why are we in that part of the world, and what is our goal and our mission? All of these things will be covered, inshallah, to your satisfaction, inshallah, if you stay with me in the next few nights. I will unpack these for you. But tonight is a very special night where we welcome and we commemorate Imam al-Hussain and the coming of Muharram al-Haram. You see, Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese-American poet, he said, we may forget those who we laugh with, but we never forget those who we weep with. And there is a power in the tears and weeping. It is a sign of one who is alive. In fact, when the child is born, one of the first things that the doctor or the physician looks for, or the family looks for, is the crying of the child. To know that this child is alive, to know this child has a heart, to know this child is breathing, to know this child is alive. When we forget and we stop weeping, we stop forgetting, and we start forgetting what is it that makes us human beings. Imam Hussain alayhi salam reminds us, remember, few personalities in the world are known from the corner of Vancouver to Australia, Sydney and Melbourne, from the corner of Argentina to the corner of Russia, to the Caribbean, to the United States, to the United Kingdom, through France, and all the way throughout the world, to Japan, to China, and through the Middle East. As Sayyid al-Shuhada is everywhere in the world, this name is being commemorated. It's a living miracle. It's a breathing miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah knows how to keep His mission alive. Allah knows how to keep His message alive. Allah knows who to have as His representative. And He has chosen Sayyid al-Shuhada. Now remember, this night and this year we have entered 1444. I want this to be, through the inspiration of Sayyid al-Shuhada, I want this to be the best year of your life. The best year doesn't mean the easiest year. The best year means the most meaningful year. The best year means the most impactful year. The best year means where you become the best version of yourself. And as a result of that, you begin to help others. It is very necessary for us to unpack this in understanding who we are. Imam al-Hussain, he says a line which I'll be repeating. And he says, one of the final things that he says on the plains of Karbala, he says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he converses with Allah, and he says, Ilahi qad wafayta ufu bi'ahdik. He says, my Lord, I have done what I said. I have fulfilled my part of the bargain. I have done what I said. Ufu bi'ahdik. Now you do your part. The principle that the Imam teaches us, we must do whatever is in our ability to do the best and the maximum of our ability. The rest we leave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some of the solutions we'll also come up with in the next few nights. But this morning, and this commemoration is not something that we have brought out of our own pocket. The narrations say that even the prophets used to weep in the commemoration of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Before that, even Rasulullah in his own life, he used to commemorate Hamza, who was the first Sayyid al-Shuhada, his uncle, who was killed in battle in Uhud. And he said, why are the people not weeping and crying for Hamza? So the principle is Rasulullah himself commemorated and said that we should remember. But this Rasulullah also wept and remembered Imam al-Hussain while he was alive. When Sayyid al-Shuhada was born, and when Sayyid al-Shuhada was born, Rasulullah smiled and he cried. And Fatima al-Zahra, the mother of Sayyid al-Shuhada, the daughter of Rasulullah, said, my father, you smiled, but you also cried? I said, is there something wrong with my son? He says, no, there's nothing wrong with him. He's amazing. He's Hussain. Hussain means little beauty. And subhanAllah, Hussain is the most beautiful. Hussain comes from Hussain. This Hussain changed the world. And Imam Hussain at his birth, Rasulullah said, Fatima, I need to tell you something. It's not easy, it's difficult. But sit down for a moment. This child, when you were expecting him, was something different? He said, yes. He said, well, first of all, Imam Hussain was in the womb. Typically a child is in the womb for 9 months. Hussain alayhi salam was in the womb for 6 months. The same way as Yahya was, John the Baptist. And there's many similarities between the two. But he said, yes, he used to say something to me in the womb. He said, my child, what would he say? What would he say? Father Zehra said, my father, he would say, my mother, Ana al-Madloom. So my mother, I'm the one who's oppressed, who's been oppressed. He said, Fatima, did he say anything else? He said, yes, my father. He would say, my mother, Ana al-Gharib. My mother, I'm the stranger in a strange land. One meaning of gharib is to be a foreigner or a stranger in a strange land. Another of gharib is you may be in your own land, in your own town, and no one understands you. You are standing for truth, you are standing for the right message, but your own people don't understand. And he says, Rasulullah says, Fatima, does he say anything else to you? He said, yes. He says, one more thing that I don't know. Can you please tell me, my father, what is it that he means? What he says, that breaks my heart. He said, what does he say? He says, my mother, Ana al-Atshan. My mother, I'm thirsty. Rasulullah begins to cry. And he says, Fatima, this Hussain, he will give a big sacrifice. And at that point in time, he will be slaughtered on the plains of Karbala. And when he says this, Fatima Zehra says, my father, when this happens, will you be there? He says, no, Fatima, I will not be there. He says, when this happens, will Hassan be there? His brother, no. Will Ali be there? He said, no. Will I be there? He said, no. He said, then who will weep for my son? Who will remember? Who will commemorate? That's where he says, Allah will give rise to a nation whose elders will weep for Hussein's elders, whose youngsters will weep for Hussein's youngsters, whose women will weep for Hussein's women, whose men will weep for Hussein's men. And that is why this message is still alive. Because it's not the weeping for weeping's sake, it is the weeping to revive humanity and wake up the human conscience. Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam is ordered, Yazid gives the orders, and he says to the wali of Medina, the governor of Medina, he says, take the bay'ah of Hussain ibn Ali. He calls Imam al-Hussain in the middle of the night. And when he calls Imam al-Hussain, he calls on 18 Banu Hashim from the family of Sayyid al-Shuhada. He calls his loved ones, the likes of Abbas, the likes of Aliyun al-Akbar, the likes of the youth of Honor Muhammad and the likes. He says, all of you come. Look, I've been called to the governor's palace. I'm going there. You are not to come inside with me, but stand outside. If my voice raises, and I raise my voice, then you come inside. If it doesn't, then you stay out here. At that point in time, Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam enters. When he enters, at that point in time, there are people who begin to discuss, and they begin to say, they say that Yazid has ordered for you to give the bay'ah, to pledge allegiance to him, and give your bay'ah. He says, at that point in time, if this is the case, then why do you not take the bay'ah in the middle of the day, in front of the people? Ask me at that point in time, and I will give you my answer. At that point in time, they begin to discuss amongst themselves, and they say, very well. But at that point in time, one of the mal'oon, he says that if Hussain leaves you at this time, you will not be able to get him again. Behead him, kill Hussain, or take his bay'ah. Make sure that you do it now. At that point in time, Imam al-Hussain hears this and he raises his voice. He says, will you kill me or will this one? And at that point in time, the Banu Hashim youth, Abbas and the others enter in with their swords drawn. And they say, say the shuhada, say the word, and we will finish the enemy here. Imam al-Hussain stops them. And at that point in time, Abu Abdullah leaves. But at that time, he knew what he is to do. And he says that I must leave Medina. And I must go towards my destiny. And at that point in time, he tells his family, make the preparations, we are leaving Medina. and we are going towards our destiny. At that night, the narrations say, Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam, he goes to the grave of Rasulullah, and the way he goes to the grave, he says to the grave, by the grave of his grandfather Rasulullah, he says, Ya Rasulullah, take me into the grave. I want to be with you. I don't want to leave this city. This is the city I grew up in. This is my home. But the circumstances have forced me to leave. He got up and then he proceeded, according to narrations, he went towards the grave of his mother Fatima al-Zahra. But the narrations say he first went to Rasulullah, then he went to the grave of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba. The way he went to the grave of his grandfather and Hassan al-Mujtaba was the same, that he went walking. But the narrations say that when he went to the grave of Fatima al-Zahra, he went running. They say as if a child were to run to their mother. Imam al-Hussain ran to the grave of Fatima al-Zahra. He fell on the grave of Fatima al-Zahra and he began to cry. And what Allah knows what he said to his mother, Fatima al-Zahra, the one who was the closest to him, the one who the narrations say that Shaykh Abbas al-Qummi, it says in the riwayat that when Fatima al-Zahra was about to leave this world, there was a moment, and that moment broke the heart of all those who were writing the history. Azadaro do jumle sun lijiye, कहते हैं जब बीबी फातिमा ज़हरा इस दुनिया से रुखसत हो रही थी, तो फिर जब गुस्ल कफन दिया गया और रुखसत आखिर के लिए इमाम हसन और हुसैन आए, बीबी ज़ैनब आई, सब आए, मगर इमाम अली देख रहे थे कि एक हुसैन थे जो नहीं आ रहे थे। और हुसैन से जब अमीरुल मोमिनीन ने कहा कि ऐ हुसैन, तूने आके रुखसत नहीं किया अपनी माँ से, हुसैन ने कहा कि बाबा, माँ जब भी दुनिया में थी मुझे खुद बुलाती थी, जब तक माँ नहीं बुलाएंगी मैं नहीं आऊंगा। शेख अब्बास कुम्मी लिखते हैं कि बंदे कफन टूटे, ज़हरा ने हाथ बरामद किए, कहा है हुसैन मेरे लाल आजा, आजा है हुसैन, मेरी आवाज़ पे आ। सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि या रसूल अल्लाह, सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि या अमीरुल मुमिनीन, सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि या फातिमा ज़हरा सय्यदतुन निसाइल आलमीन, सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि या हसन अल-मुज्तबा, अस्सलामु अलल हुसैन व अला अली इब्न हुसैन وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. سورة الفاتحة.